can we always get stronger fingers? Like, where's the upper limit?
I think it's one of those things of its application is the probably a very considerable factor. I mean, you can have the strongest fingers in the world, but is your hip mobility in line with that to apply it on a wall? Like, there's so many things tied into it. Specifically for myself, there was certainly a lot of like lumbrical adaptation that needed to happen, which is one thing that I definitely didn't have in my right hand. So it was just nice to develop on that. So yeah, you can get stronger for sure.
Getting stronger is not as helpful, in my opinion, as it would be if you're not actually getting the technical, adjunct with it. Where Rob is already a ridiculously good climber. Like I've climbed with him and watched him climb. Like his skills are so good, and so to see his fingers, the intention of his training changed, and so it was on average just a more muscular adaptation. But to see that in conjunction with the technical skills, there's no question that that would improve his performance. Where what you see conversely is a lot of people just making their fingers stupid strong, but they're not getting the same intention with their climbing practice, and then they will not see the transfer as well.
Tyler Nelson, welcome back to the Test Piece Podcast. And thanks for bringing a friend with you today, Rob Hunter. Welcome, boys.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Tyler, we had a great chat last time, episode number 114. You are the founder of Camp for Human Performance. Can you remind everyone listening just a little bit about your work there?
Yeah, so my company is, I guess it's becoming more split with rehab and climbing coaching, strength conditioning. What I personally do is a lot of rehabilitation consults, both in person in Salt Lake City and then remotely. And then I have a team of coaches that work with me that do a lot of the climbing, coaching, and strength conditioning stuff. So in conjunction to that, I just spend a lot of my time reading research papers and investigating training interventions with technology tools and kind of geeking out in that context.
And spreading the good word on podcasts.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, some things are challenged in that context, which maybe people don't like, but the goal is hopefully to get people thinking about things we do with training.
100%. Rob, you are also working in the climbing world with your company, My Therapy Physio and Performance. Tell us a little
Yes,
bit
indeed.
about your company and also where you're coming from.
So based in Ireland, myself and my wife set up our business back in 2013, and we do a lot of remote programming, S&C, coaching. As part of that, I've coached the Ireland climbing team for the last 10 years. Yeah, that involves just traveling to comps and assisting athlete development and performance. So yeah.
Well, thanks for hopping on. It's late there in Ireland. Appreciate you staying up late for us. And I think that the best way to start out this chat is me just sharing some context for how it came to be. And basically, Tyler messaged me and said something along the lines of, "Hey, Josh, I've been working with a friend slash colleague slash client who has had some really interesting physiological responses to the recent training, just that his hand and finger strength has greatly increased, even though he's already well trained and has been climbing for 40 years. That friend is you, Rob." And yeah, so for me, it was cool to hear, wow, someone got stronger fingers. But when I learned more about you, Rob, it was just way more interesting to me. And that's because on top of those 40 years of climbing, 30 plus years of hard training, you're also an extremely accomplished climber with first ascents up to V14 or AP plus. You have a degree in the field. Like you said, you've worked with people for a long time. And so for me, knowing that you've studied it all, tried it with others, seen success over the decades, it was fascinating to me to hear that you've seen another full notch of improvement while working with Tyler. So that's a little context. And Rob, I'm going to toss it back to you to try to take us through some of those decades of experience in just a few short minutes. Just summarize those decades really quickly for us.
Sure. Where to begin? I suppose initially, like back when I was climbing, it was climbing. and it followed a lot of the Jerry Moffat stroke Ben Moon old school the real thing videos of like campus until you're busted, trying to hang off edges. Then it got a little bit more specific, like using pulleys and whatnot to hang off fingerboards to try and increase the finger strength. Weighted campusing would have been in there, like there was lots of crazy shenanigans going on. And this was obviously before I was at college. Went to college and things started to change. For me, I've always had a real interest in like gymnastics and maintaining physicality for life and not just for climbing is really important to me. So yeah, a lot of S&C, calisthenics, those kind of things help to balance. And I would say assist for me to be where I could still climb today. So yeah, we did a lot of finger rolls would have been another thing. There's just many aspects of yeah.
So, yeah. So again, you've been climbing for 40 years, which is wild. Just I feel like congrats that it's hard to keep it up. And I'm sure you had to spend a few days on the couch from injuries of maybe poor training or just unluckiness that happens over decades. But why did you first reach out to Tyler? Because you have trained so many people, you have tried all the trainings, you've had success with trainings along the way. But what was that catalyst to say, hey, Tyler, let's talk?
On a personal level, it's just always remaining open and it's reaching out to like Tyler's done a lot of research. He's obviously read a lot of papers and even just like having communication with him, like we just discussed training. And I've obviously talked to other coaches along the way. For me, it was more the specifics, and Tyler was very, very, I would say, quick to understand my needs. And it was very specific to a particular climbing project that I would like to, yeah, still haven't done it yet, but we're getting there.
Well, yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about what those particulars are on that project, and then we'll toss it back to Tyler to hear what it was like dealing with those specifics for you.
Sure, really simple, 5 moves, incredibly powerful, I'm going to say 50 to 60-degree overhang on very small holds. Um, and the first 3 moves just revolves around keeping your hand closed with your pretty much your elbows super glued to your rib cage. And then from there, it's quite an explosive move to the lip. So very simple, very powerful.
Tyler, before you hop in, I'm curious, Rob, was this a project that, so you, is it in Fairhead, and is it like a project that you've had for a long time, or is it just something that, you dug up or finally found and caught your eye?
And this has been sitting in a very obvious place for a very long time. Myself and my brother first tried it way back, jeepers, in the early thousands. And honestly, we could do like the first 2 moves and we were just like, we wrote it off. It was just like, it's not going to happen. This thing's just like a level above. And I'm going to say probably 4 years ago that I went back to it again. And it was like, okay, like things have changed. My yeah, connection to rock has obviously improved over time, and yeah, I obviously am physically stronger now than I was in the 30s. Crazy, but it is what it is. I think it's more the rock intuition, and I definitely feel I connected with it. It was like, okay, this is go time. But I know it's like been a 4 year span, but the opportunity to get on it with weather, work, traveling with the climbing team, like it takes a lot. So this year for me is definitely yeah, I have time.
Yeah, Tyler. So Rob came to you with this amazing training history, extremely impressive climbing resume, even just tickless style. And what was that first chat like?
Oh, it was great. Like I know Rob from back years ago when I went to the UK and did a course, and just like most of the climbers that I go to and like are at my clinics, they're just like immediately friends. And so we've chatted just on and off since then through Instagram and just talk business stuff and injury stuff. And so like it's always really fun to work with someone that's needs something that's really specific for their project. But the reality is it wasn't that different than what I would do for most of my clients. The thing that was really incredible and interesting to do on the podcast is it's easy to make a beginner fingers stronger and them to see performance, but it's not as easy to make someone that's already very skilled and very strong, because Rob's already very strong, a little bit stronger. Like that's a bit more challenging thing to do. So it's very fun to have that kind of as a challenge. And it's very easy as well for me because I know that Rob will do the work. And so that also, like, you know, in order to get the adaptation, you actually have to get the things done. And so the compliance there was very high too. So I was very excited to like try these ideas on him, which I've done on lots of people.
Who excellent patient, yeah, who actually listens. That's the best, the best person to work with. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I can't help but grab onto something you just said there, Rob, where you said you're stronger than you were in your 30s. I think I want to say you're in your later 40s now. And first of all, awesome, just really inspiring for someone like me who's in his later 30s. But there's like this underlying assumption there that maybe Robbie can speak to, and you too, Tyler, is can I guess can fingers keep getting stronger and stronger? Seeing your results when you underwent this program in your mid 40s or late 40s. I guess I'm just struggling with the concept that my best days are maybe in front of me, and just can we always get stronger fingers? Like, where's the upper limit?
I I think it's one of those things of its application is the probably a very considerable factor in that. I mean, you can have the strongest fingers in the world, but it's like, is your hip mobility in line with that to apply it on a wall? Like, there's so many things tied into it. Um, and specifically for myself, there was certainly a lot, and we'll get into it as we go along, but it was certainly a lot of like lumbrical adaptation that needed to happen, which is one thing that I definitely didn't have in my right hand. So it was just nice to develop on that. So yeah, you can get stronger for sure. But there's obviously, as you get older, it's like family, work, and all those other considerations around it.
I would say the great thing as well is, or that's important to identify, is that getting stronger is not as helpful, in my opinion, as it would be if you're not actually getting the technical, adjunct with it. Where Rob is already a ridiculously good climber. Like I've climbed with him and watched him climb. Like his skills are so good, and so to see his fingers, the intention of his training changed. And so it was on average just a more muscular adaptation. But to see that in conjunction with the technical skills, there's no question that that would improve his performance. Where what you see conversely is a lot of people just making their fingers stupid strong, but they're not getting the same intention with their climbing practice. And then they will not see the transfer as well. And so it really is like seeing the transfer there was very clear and obvious. And it was very cool.
Yeah, I feel like we were just talking about this. I totally just made the classic mistake of like, yeah, like let's just always get stronger. And it doesn't matter how old you are, and you can always get stronger and stronger and stronger. And you guys both wanted to make it very clear that again, the whole goal is to get better at climbing. When you have a specific project in front of you and there's certain limitations, let's address those in a narrow way. And so let's get into that. Rob, it sounds like you knew the holds that were on the project. You have this amazing training history. Can you tell me how what did that conversation look like with Tyler? What was the really narrow, specific thing you were looking for that Tyler could help with?
I think it's, I suppose again, that would be tied into like training history and whatnot. Like a lot of the time, I would use say the Beastmaker 2000. I have a Climbro, which is like a load cell based training device there. Like I've obviously used lots of different things. Like obviously the Beastmaker micros, but again, it's coming back to like the specifics of the hand that I wouldn't say ignoring, but just that weren't there to hold the particular holes that I needed to hold, as in it's a very specific closed hand position. And for me, and again, for most people, when you see like hanging on boards, it's like very straight, it's very open here. Uh, and you'll find a lot of pointer fingers are quite straight, so it's obviously go for more that chisel grip style. Um, and obviously then working with Tyler, he's like, okay, again, he asked to see some footage. I was reluctant to show him. I don't want him coming over and climbing my approach. But yeah, he asked for some footage. We checked it out together, and it was just like, okay, I can see the positions you're in, and we had a really good discussion about, okay, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And as I say, then the finger protocol was tied more into my warm up to really address this. For me, in my head, Tyler, you could definitely jump in. For me, it was like the lumbrical activation and actually being able to stabilize with my index now has made, yeah, a massive difference.
Yeah, pretty much made all of his finger training 10 mil, or that's it, like 10 mil. And he was using a curved edge, which is just a little bit more ergonomic on the hand. I think it's a Beastmaker edge, right? You have kind of a fixed block you use, Rob. Yeah, so it has like a
Yeah.
nice curve to it, so he can get all the fingers in that closed position. But with every effort that he did, he essentially put the MCP joint in flexion. So he's training the coordination in that grip position while he's targeting the muscles in the hand and the forearm a little bit more intentionally with every rep.
Okay, let's try to describe it better since we're on a podcast, even though this will go on YouTube too. There is, the classic hangboarding that you were talking about, Rob, where you have a Beastmaker micro or the hangboard, and you were doing kind of a chisel grip or that kind of like half crimp, non wrist extension. And then you just held up a kind of a rounded, bigger edge, and it was on I don't know, on a block kind of thing that is
hmm
hooked up. What did Tyler recommend you do with that specific hold?
It's coming back to intentionality. So for me, that this hold, well, it was very specific. There was a reason why I picked it, and it's the reason it's on a board. For me, especially for lumbrical activation, it's harder to establish a really good like psychological connection with your hands. So for me, it's actually having my palm against this as well as I curl in really helps me to actually get into that position. Does
Okay,
that make sense? Whereas you
yes.
find on a lot of fingerboards, because your palm's free, you're kind of swinging around, and this usually just lies in this kind of position. So to have that feedback and to be able to actually roll in made a massive difference.
Looks to me like you're going from a open hand or kind of almost half crimp position into a full crimp on a pretty positive rounded edge. Is two things like, am I describing that right? And is that edge basically mimicking the hold on your project?
The hold is slightly big, so the hold on the board is 15 millimeters. It's slightly bigger than the one on the Proge, and this one, as I say, I would use, yeah, to really just warm the fingers up and actually perform the strength training protocol on this.
Okay, let's push it back to Tyler and talk about what that protocol is. Like, so that's the kind of tool he's using, but what was the goal and what's the structure of that program for Rob?
I should have probably pulled it up, but I don't remember. It was a couple months ago, maybe 6 months ago or something. It's been a little while of time, but essentially it's doing auto-regulated with using the Tyndek and doing overcoming style isometrics. And then we had him doing, I think, 10-second like overcoming style isometrics at variable intensities for repetitions until he can no longer hold those that force output and just auto regulate the sessions. And then in conjunction with that, doing on the wall kind of coordination climbing drills, which are all in line with the same kinds of grips that he needs to be prepared for on the wall, and practice locking off on those grips and practice. And then essentially starting with bigger feet and dropping the feet to being smaller to where he's actually doing the kind of wall crawl style coordination training, like at a really high intensity. But it's also important to think about, like, for maybe, and we'll say this some point, but I thought about it when Rob was talking, is this is a really specific protocol for someone that's a really high level climber, right? This would be a really bad protocol for someone that's climbing V6 or V7 on a board, right? And so, like, just to say that very clearly, like, that's a really intense protocol for someone's fingers that are very tolerant of, mechanical stress.
Good shouting that out. And that's why I'm so interested, to be honest, you guys. I like you said earlier, Tyler, it's not that amazing to take someone from beginner and go from V0 to V2. And yes, they will get stronger fingers. But Rob, with your history, again, really interesting to see that you've seen gains from this. So just to further delineate what you're doing, can you again describe, maybe contrasting what you would do on a hangboard previously and then what this looks like? I'm sorry I make you repeat it, but just I really want to talk about that idea of yielding isometrics versus overcoming isometrics, and how kind of the traditional training that I feel like we most think of when I think of Jerry Moffitt on the hangboard versus Rob Hunter today.
Sure. Uh, okay, so I can give two examples. One would be like weighted pull-ups on the 10 millimeter Beastmaker little micro edges. For me, it always in the past would have been like a thumb stack against the side of the edge rather than a wrap. It's just too uncomfortable and too painful. So yeah, thumb stack in the side and just basically weighted pulls. And again, it's a very yielding style where you're like slowly rolling open. So that's one example. And the second example would be I have a Climbro system, which is like it's like Bluetooth connectivity to your phone. It's just basically it's like a load cell, so it's just working at say 80% of your MVC, your max voluntary contraction, and that way. But again, it's still a very yielding, passive style pull on the edge.
Yeah, this is the thing you keep getting at, is there's this idea of intention, and it's, I guess, I don't know, I don't want to say this is what they were doing in the past, but it's something I've done in the past where you just kind of get on the fingerboard and, just put your fingers in whatever position and just hang there until you can't anymore, until your fingers open up, like you're saying, a yielding isometric. But when you're showcasing what you're doing with this hold on the board, you're not holding on to it until you can't anymore. You're actually actively overcoming the resistance and trying to pull into a crimp. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I suppose it's like thinking way back when Daniel Woods was having like I can't even remember what he was, it like piano fingers or something, where it's like closing the hand and then opening it up. Like it was quite an old school. It came and went. It was like
Mm-hmm.
another fad that people were performing, and just connecting to that. Isabella and Volker Schofel did a lot of research on obviously eccentric loading having a real negative impact on like your pulleys in that respect. So I suppose like I'm thinking Daniel doing this was a great idea, but the eccentric loading probably wasn't so good for the vast majority of the population. Does it feel it's the concentric phase or portion of that is definitely what has excelled my hand strength.
Yeah. So Tyler, why did you recommend that style of training?
I've been kind of barking up that tree for maybe 8 years now or something, quite a long time. And like I have quite a few numbers, maybe 150 athletes numbers, where when we test people and we test the difference, if you're pulling past like in a yielding style on a 20 millimeter edge and you're isolating the finger flexors and you're curling into that edge, those forces are not the same. The yielding style will always be greater and the overcoming will be lower. And so the argument there, or the hypothesis there, is the overcoming style is a more muscular load. So there's no way in the context of having your knees and your elbows locked out like Rob did with his training that he can produce more force any other way other than making the muscles be recruited at a slightly higher intensity. And he's already quite strong. And so it's not even really that he gained more recruitment. It probably just woke up the motor units that were less activated with the other style of training. Because when we do a hanging style protocol, and we see this on the climbing wall, it's a very efficient way of doing more repetitions because you load more connective tissue, so you have a greater capacity. But that's not the goal with his finger strength training. The goal was to actually increase the recruitment to its limit and auto regulate it with the strain gauge, but then also allow him to utilize that on the wall, because the positions that you gain that recruitment from are very, very specific. So we needed to also do it in those positions that he needs.
Okay, the two things I hear there that's kind of obvious but interesting is that when you focus on just hanging or those overcoming or those yielding isometrics, the numbers are always going to be higher than if they are overcoming isometrics because you're relying on connective tissue. And then once that gives, you it's your max ability. And so when you take someone like Rob, he has highly trained that connective tissue and maybe undertrained or spent less time focusing on that recruitment and intentionality of the overcoming isometrics. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, it's an explanation of why the Emil Ibrahim protocol that they did where his numbers went up. Same thing. They just like he discontinued his normal training and replaced it with this style where he's applying force on an edge in a different way, and it just activated the motor units that are there and readily available very quickly, and then when you go back and you test those, the strength will stay high. And so if he went back to his normal training protocols and did the hangboarding stuff, those would probably go down a little bit. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but they would come back up again if you change the training to be more muscular. So it's really just like, you gain high levels of recruitment. If you don't keep doing that, they might diminish a little bit, but it's very easy to get strong again if you actually target the muscle more. So for finger training, kind of my big message, I think now for my career, I guess, is like people just need to be more intentional with their finger training. And if they want to use a fingerboard, you need to make sure that you're more intentional with every rep, and it'll drop the weight a little bit, but make sure you keep the focus, which is targeting the muscle to be a little bit stronger, because a lot of the connective tissue adaptations we get those from climbing. We don't really need to overly stress the fingers off the wall for the sake of connective tissue adaptations.
So, Rob, tell me how that felt in that new style of training. Or was it new for you doing the style of training? Is it something you had tried before? What was it like for you kind of switching up?
Hmm. I think just going back to the like obviously the overcoming like closing style, it's not really something like potentially you would do it on a hold while you're climbing, but not intentionally as a training. Again, going back to the Daniel Woods protocol, like we played around with that for a little bit, but it's just kind of again following the research. It's like okay, if you're doing this like with load, whatever it may be, you're just gonna totally screw your fingers up. So that was just it was a no go. So yes, it was quite I'd say a novel training experience for me.
Yeah. So, what was it like after 3 or 4 months? Did you completely stop doing the classic yielding isometrics? How did your numbers work out in this switch?
So just completely stopped any kind of one arm hang protocols that I would have done, and just basically went straight onto the tin deck. I'm quite I like to follow things to the detail when I'm practicing and training. I've always been that way. So as Tyler says, I'm quite compliant with things that I've given, so I just stuck with that. I would say for the space of 6 months. Only thing that I didn't do was test my MVC. Like, yeah, I'm gonna say it was once every 3 months. I just took the initial test of where my max voluntary contraction was to work at a percentage of, and it was up to a maximum of 70% for my working sets. And yeah, I stuck to the program. Tested in 3 months, tested in 3 months, and the numbers was a little bit of an exponential jump.
Hmm, that feels good. For just to help us understand, like the relative strength in MVC, I think that's maximum voluntary contraction.
Sure.
Like, do you have your numbers for say, uh, I don't know, it's not, the not the non-voluntary contraction, but let's just say you were just pulling as hard as you could on a 20 mil edge. And then when you're curling that and doing it with intention and pulling up, how big is like what percentage is that MVC compared to your absolute ability? What's the delta there?
Well, I'm gonna say for me, from a figures perspective, so from a yielding style perspective, I don't have my numbers to hand, but I'm gonna say it was considerably higher for the overcoming curling style, I reckon it was hitting maybe 60% of what I could actually do from a yielding style isometric.
And then how much did that go up over the course of 6 months?
It nearly doubled.
And so what was that then in relation to your yielding numbers?
So those numbers I do have. So compared to, I went from pretty much 35 kilos from like when I first started, when I first measured the MVC, and it went up to, specifically for my right hand, it went up to 65 kilos.
That's a huge gain.
Huge.
Yeah. So did you then go back after 6 months and test your yielding isometrics, like your one arm hang? Like what happened with those numbers? Those kind of classic numbers.
Hell yeah. I mean, yeah, I can walk into the garage now and still hang the middle Beastmaker or the 23 mil edge or the 20 mil edge, like, yeah, off the couch. Like, obviously, I'm still working on the, like, curling, the finger curls, and I find they work really well.
Tell maybe talk about like the fatigue or the difference there, because I know we
I thought we were going to come to that, actually. Yeah, that's,
like that's another thing. The overcoming ISO stuff, at least the literature that I've read, would say that it should be less fatiguing. And so when it comes to the application of when you would use it, you would probably use that more, because we tried to target this like right before he was hopefully getting a weather window for this project. So I wanted to like have his training be as little fatigue as possible, obviously, because he's busy and he doesn't need to get really tired. He needs to get strong and as little, fatigue as possible. So maybe talk about that, Rob.
so from a, I would say that was actually one of the points where I struggled a little bit in that I like to come out of the gym tired. So to actually, yeah, it was interesting just to have more gas left in the tank to actually, like, for intraday recovery. That was just definitely, and I suppose, like, again, having the chat with Tyler and it didn't happen. I was hoping we were going to get like a nice month of good, dry, stable weather, quite low humidity. I'm going to say low, I'm talking 70% humidity. Yeah, anything less than 90 in Ireland is good. So yeah, I would say definitely having a little bit of extra gas left in the tank and not being as fatigued.
Let me make sure I understand what you guys mean by fatigue. So, comparing it to your typical, one arm hangs or cranking out on the small beast maker edges with a bunch of weight, do you just mean that you were like there was less time under tension, less intensity doing these MVC, these curling type of movements just as a whole, but then you still saw these incredible gains?
Absolutely. If you think of this as, if you want to say, percentages of my max voluntary contraction. So if you want to say like hanging on a fingerboard, I'd certainly be in 80 to say 90%. Whereas my working sets for the finger curls were between, I'm going to say like 70, 60, 75% max.
Why does it work like that, Tyler? Why can you in this type of training you can go with lower intensity and see gains?
Well, I think the intensity is just relative to the type of contraction that we were doing, and the one rep max that was difference that was different is what he's referring to. But I would also like hypothesize that with the heavy fingerboarding loads, there's more stretch to the muscle. It's like a slow stretch, but there's a stretch to the muscle. And when we go to failure, we go to the grip opening. The eccentric literature would say that you get like more muscle stretch and calcium ion leftovers in the muscle, and it takes, they take longer to clear out. So metabolically, just like is a more fatiguing type of contraction. And so one of the other points maybe to make is like we tried to make his training as low fatigue as possible and as muscular as possible. But like you mentioned, I wanted him to spend more time practicing lapping his wall, which is a really nice spray wall on small grips, to make sure the adaptation from the recruitment actually happened on the wall with the coordination training stuff too. And so it's like having that little extra effort with every session on the wall is probably a big part of the difference of what was like experience for him as a training adaptation.
I see. So you're saying that we shouldn't mistake just this kind of finger curling as something that should be taken in isolation, and that was in conjunction with practicing the grip type that you were going to use on your project. And also, does that have any relation to like connective tissue focus by kind of being in that closed position and climbing on it?
Absolutely, 100%. So, like the connective tissue adaptations that people get are very grip specific. And that's one of the, I would say for average climbers like myself or a lot of my clients that want to, or that have that feel they need more control on smaller holds outside, that's pretty much all they need. They probably have been doing enough finger strength. They're probably producing high forces. They just aren't spending that much time in those positions on the climbing wall, and therefore they're not getting that much of a coordination adaptation from it. So that's where the climbing slowly on the wall and just like practicing grabbing those grips really is the differentiating factor. Because if you climb at your limit on a board, you're not spending that much time on those holds. You're falling most of the time. You're grabbing, you're adjusting your feet, and you're falling, but that's not that big of a stimulus to make those tissues stiff.
Rob, I gotta ask you, with your tons of experience, I'm sure you've spent a lot of time on spray walls and climbed outdoors a lot. I would think that that wasn't very new or novel for you. Am I correct? I would think that you've already spent a lot of time on small holds and practicing that. So, was that also a new kind of approach for you?
For me, I like to move fast. It's just something I've always been good at. I just like to move fast on a wall. So to actually slow things down like considerably and spend quite a lot of time under tension on holes was quite novel for me. And I would say there were certain gains as well from just developing that so context on the board that I have, I can set it up whatever way I want. So at like 10 millimeter crimps to work on, very small feet. So that crossbody tension, like really working through for adductors, pulling in, getting locked in, it's very easy for me to set up. Uh, and again, just to be quite to replicate. I didn't have a replica per se of the project, but just to actually replicate those closed hand positions and the core stability to match it really helped.
Interesting. So, as you progressed through these months, what changes did you notice on the wall?
So on the project itself, the sessions that I had on that, a lot more hand control, shoulder stability, and for me, it's just being able to spend more time on it, even interest in the sessions, rather than just like, 3 attempts and it's like, right, okay, you're starting to gas, you need to take a break for a couple of hours to come back. It was just I could actually spend like longer on the proj and still, yeah, my body wasn't gassing.
Why is that? Was it something about just having more strength in the closed hand? Like, I mean, maybe Tyler, you can hypothesize on this, or Rob.
I would say it's definitely the combination of both. Like obviously the capacity to be able to close my hand for longer was one, obviously from the finger strength training, but then from the really like super slow wall crawl, like I want to say like the collaboration of those two things really assisted in that yeah, adaptation.
What do you think, Tyler? Any thoughts on why? I mean, I guess you prescribe the protocol, but yeah, how does that? How do you think it translates?
I would, if we had magically some way to measure the amount of force he was applying on the hold on the project, I doubt that that would be higher. But his ability to like control it and his ability to do multiple efforts in a session went up because he just got better at using less force on that hold because his coordination went up, and then he had a capacity adaptation, which is exactly what happens with finger training protocols that transfer well to the climbing wall.
Yeah. This is what's so interesting to me, you guys, is that when I see people, and I'm just going to use myself as an example. I've been climbing a long time. My fingers are pretty strong, and so this is why it is fascinating to me because I keep wanting to get stronger and stronger. Because who doesn't? I mean, let's be serious, you guys. It feels good to see your numbers go up. But you said something to me, Tyler, something along the lines of Josh, you've been climbing for 30 years. You're hucking yourself around on the boards. Like, do you really think that your connective tissue is going to get way stronger? Do you really think that, there's going to be some magical program that your number is going to fly up? And so hearing about you actually really seeing better results on the wall, and it's more due to coordination and activation versus just, I don't know, crushing it even harder. It's something that I still struggle with because I get so numbers obsessed. But hearing you, Rob, like feel good on the wall, and then hearing you, Tyler, say probably not actually applying more force. And so I guess I'm just reiterating what you guys are saying. But one of my questions that I have there is, Rob, why not just climb on the project a bunch more? Why wouldn't that have given you the same gains? Or what do you think about just that classic style of, hey, just go climb on your project more and you'll get stronger?
I would love to. Obviously, there's many factors tied into that. If I was a full-time athlete or, yeah, not working, that would definitely, because as a climber that climbs a lot outdoors, understanding your environment and being connected in your environment well, it's very important to me. So yeah, it certainly would be great. But for me, like time, work, other commitments, it only allows you so many windows. And there's other things to do as well. Like for me, contextually, I'm not like all eggs in one basket. I like to be well rounded for other things. And it's nice just to, yeah, tip away in the project and again, obviously climb and other stuff. So
What do you think, Tyler? Do you think we could, Rob would have seen these same results if he had spent all his time on the project?
Probably not, because you just don't spend that much time on the holds. Like I've watched him climb on that project. It is a insanely complicated, technical, high intensity kind of movement that is mostly for a short duration and you fall. And so in terms of a stimulus, that's just not that much of a stimulus. Obviously, it's the most important technical stimulus, but when it comes to like training to replicate that, we need to find a way to overload the hand more so it can build tolerance for doing more of that at a slightly higher intensity, which is the point of any sort of strength training intervention. And then we need to find a way to give him capacity in that grip so he can have more practice, he can have more efforts and attempts on that project. And so I would predict that if he would have got that weather window, it probably would have been really close to being sent, because he was feeling pretty good on that project, but the weather is kind of troubling like that with climbing.
I know, Rob, you're not going to brag for yourself, so I'm just going to toss out there that you think that this might be a V15 or a 8C climb, and that it's been tried by many. And so I just want to give that context for people to hear that, potentially trying your project when its limit moves. I mean, of course, the technical adaptations are great, but it also rings true to me that when you have so little time under tension, skin, just, I don't know, you're playing with so many factors that it doesn't necessarily lead to the best adaptations for the project. But with that said, you can't just go into your basement, never touch your project for 6 months and hope it's always going to work out. There's a balance there.
absolutely, yeah, there's 100% a balance. I mean, contextually, I would still go out on pretty bad days and still get on the project because you need to maintain that element of connectivity and understanding for your body. So it's just trying to get that happy balance of both.
Okay, I want to ask a little bit more about these finger curls. Can I call them finger curls, what you're doing on your Beastmaker Edge? By the way, are you going fully into a closed grip with a finger wrap?
I would say so I never wrap the thumb over when I'm training. I just basically like almost slide my thumb along the side of my index finger and just keep my thumb quite straight. So I don't really roll it right over. I would say there's certainly an element of like hyperextension in my PIP for sure, or DIPs.
Tyler, where are the adaptations occurring in a movement like that? We keep talking about the MCP joint. We've said lumbricals. Can you maybe explain some of those terms and where you think the adaptations are occurring, where you're getting stronger?
So I think you had mentioned like the curling and you mentioned the PIP curling, Josh. Like, so I don't think about the curling overcoming ISO as a function of curling the PIP joint. And I think the focus on the PIP joint being flexed at 90 degrees with traditional, we'll say half crimp training totally misses the point because it doesn't really, because if I like bend my fingers at 90, because you guys can see me, and I like if I could get my pinky to 90, which is hard, and I flex my MCP joint, my PIP joint doesn't flex at all. So it's not really that I'm trying to like bend at my PIP joint because that's not that good of torque, but instead I would like actually bring my fingertips towards my palm, cupping the hand, which activates the lumbricals, the interossei muscles. It just engages my hand more. And so it's in that context, when we do that, we can generate more force because those muscles have, different leverage, but that also is an adaptation that Rob just didn't really have. Those muscles probably gained some recruitment for sure.
Okay, I said PIP because I mix them up all the time. I actually meant the DIP, the joint that is closest to your fingertip, the most distal joint. Forgive me for not remembering all those. Is that going into extension or is that remaining flexed?
Remaining in it's remaining kind of like extended. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is just because we're talking about you getting better on these small crimps, and so I was wondering if you're making that motion of that closed crimp, of that classic hyperextension of the dip joint.
For me, it was most certainly like really involving the lumbricals, interossei, and whatnot, because again, it's as Tyler says, yeah, I'm just affirming that it's obviously closing the hand rather than actually like curling my fingers down like so.
Okay.
And that's where, as I say, on the hold that I have, like my hand, my palm is resting almost against the back of it, and I'm getting feedback as I'm curling into that position to really give me, more hand control.
I kind of like the idea of it like being in sand and you're just like digging a little pit with your palm. That's probably a good like cue for people to do it. But I think the grip position too I think it's pretty individual. Like a crimp won't look identical on two people. And so I would say for athletes that are like Rob, very experienced and have a lot of familiarity, the grip that he uses outside is the one that I want him to use. Like whatever that looks like, try and replicate that grip and don't try and create, because again, it's a coordination adaptation. And if we train some sort of recruitment in a different coordination pattern, that's not going to transfer as well to what we want to do on the wall. So there's that as well.
Okay, I understand the specificity on that grip, but Rob, how did it feel when you grab other small crimps? Or I'm sure that there's still plenty of small crimps on steep steep roofs that you're grabbing.
If you remember, that sound where you're like cranking a ratchet close? That's what it feels like. It just locks down. Yeah. It's very easy to, even though it was obviously specifically for that project. Yeah, on most other holes, it's definitely assisted my hand strength for sure.
Yeah, that's why I want to hear. And yeah, MCP joint. Just forgive me. I just want to make sure I'm understanding these well, especially because there's an audio version of this as well that we're communicating. The MCP joint is kind of the top of where your fingers connect to the hand. Is that correct? So you almost like you're making a fist. Yeah, I mean, that's what we often say when people grab that small crimp. It's like, all right, make a fist, you guys. And Rob, when you talk about that ratchet sound, you're just hitting it and then just reeling it in, and closing it down. And then you said you also feel locked in when you are in there.
I think an easy way to think about it is if you like hold your hand at 90 degrees and your wrist is straight, which is what a normal half crimp looks like, just have people extend their wrist. And if you extend your wrist, you flex at the MCP joint. And so that's another maybe intention that we could suggest for climbers that just by and large will be more productive long term, is it just puts the wrist in extension, which puts the finger flexors in a better position for force. And then also it trains the hand muscle. So it's just like, even for my clients that are doing half crimp training, I have all of them be more intentional at flexing the MCP joint and putting their wrist in a little bit of extension to make every single load more muscular. And everyone should do that always. There's no reason to be lazy with any sort of finger training we're doing.
We'll have to think of some external vocabulary, like extrinsic ideas to like squeeze the lemon.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
That's not a bad. That's not a bad visual or audio that turns into visual, because that's kind of what I was thinking about. I would go under the hangboard, and I was just trying this for a couple of weeks before, when you guys floated this idea to me, and that's kind of what I would think about. I'd be under the hangboard, I'd be in kind of straight wrist, and then just really trying to reel it in. It actually led me to being really pumped. I was kind of doing them as warm
It's
ups.
just more muscular for sure. It should make you more pumped. But if you watch you climb on crimps, I guarantee you're closing it down on a crimp. And so if it's like, why wouldn't you do that with all of your training? Because you're trying to get some sort of coordination from it and some sort of muscular recruitment from it. Like you just do it all the time.
Yeah, so that actually brings up a question I had for you, Tyler, is why doesn't climbing target this more? Why was Rob weak at with such an extensive climbing background?
Well, let me add something that was kind of funny. So you mentioned like squeezing the lemon. So for a video, I was like, because I think the other thing we did with Rob too is we did like some sort of circular talon grip object squeeze hand thing too for the hand muscles. And so we did kind of the same protocols with that. But I actually wanted to shoot a video, and I was like, drilled a hole in an orange. I was like, I'm going to squeeze an orange and make this point, whatever. I couldn't even squeeze a drop out of an orange. It's ridiculous how hard it is to actually get fluid out of an orange. I was blown away that that's not possible.
I'm totally gonna go try that and just.
You should try it. I want
maybe
like interesting.
Dave, we're gonna try it after for sure.
I feel like I should be able to get some juice out of it. I couldn't get. Maybe it was that orange. I could not budge the juice out of that orange.
I think there's some classic test of like, can you break an egg like that or something that's really, really hard? And then when people can do it, it's hilarious because then there's egg in the face.
Egg all over you.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'm just kind of. There's always this thing where there's always this idea in climbing, like, hey, all you need to do is climb. Hey, you need to train these different things. And this, that feeling I had when I was warming up and getting pumped by, just squeezing the lemon was interesting to me. How little I was not hanging. I wasn't hardly doing anything. And I really got fatigued quickly. And so I was just like, why is climbing not training this better? Yeah, just that
because
question.
it's not efficient. It's not an efficient way to climb a wall. And so the easy way to think about it is like if you watch like female comp climbers are the best to watch for this. They're so good at relaxing on holds in open positions and putting all the weight through their feet. They can travel a really far distance. And so in order to like ascend a wall, you don't want to make the finger force more muscular. You want to use as much passive tension as you possibly can. Certainly you're going to load muscles in that context too, but you want to like, utilize as few as possible, and you want to cycle on and off between them where you'll use the bigger ones for power moves and then you'll go right back to using the smaller ones. But and same thing with bouldering, we want to use as little force as possible on the fingers. And so you don't want to overgrip holds. That just makes you pumped. But with strength training, you definitely want to make your muscle more active. It doesn't make any sense that you would do non-muscular activities for strength training. That defeats the purpose of strength training. And if people would do that more intentionally just all the time, they would see capacity gains, they would see coordination improvement gains on the wall. All of those things are better assisted if you use loads that are more muscular.
All right, that makes perfect sense. That you're basically saying it would be bad technique to curl everything down. You're kind of trying to rely on your structures when you're trying to be efficient.
100%, unless you're doing a finger training intervention, right? And so it's like the coordination drill, that's a finger training body positioning intervention designed to get in positions that are very muscular but very particular to a grip that you're working on, and then practice positioning your body in different ways underneath those grips to create an adaptation. So your hand now, when you go climb on them, you're ready to grab those holds and then relax into your feet.
Okay, I want to really hear the nitty gritty of your setup, Rob, and how you did it. You kind of held up the hold. We described the hold. What did
Sure.
a day to day look like?
For me, so between 2 to 3 sessions a week, and I implemented it as part of my warm up for my climbing sessions. And from a loading perspective, it was just progressively overloading up to, as I say, I was basically auto regulating depending on how I was feeling on any given day. I would take it up to say 70 to 75% of my 1 rep max. And even if it was tired, this is where I suppose the Tindeck was quite good. Obviously, you'll get a little like graph and you can follow it. You're trying to hit your numbers for the day. And for me, and again, this is very personal, like I always kind of chase the like 75% marker, even if I'm tired. I'll just always try and push it. It's just the way the cloth that I've been cut from. Like I am obviously listening to my body and it's like, yep, you're tired, but you're still gonna obviously gun it for that particular like 75% of my 1 rep max. And that's pretty much how it looked.
I think that the setup you're using almost looks, I kind of imagine a tension block. That's the one I have. Somebody use as tension, but it's like a wooden block that then has a strap that usually you put around your foot. And then you have a Tindeck between that strap and that block that you've set up. And you are measuring to a certain percentage of intensity that you had tested before. And yeah, like how many reps are you doing? Does that change on the sessions? Are you doing those sessions fresh? Just a little more detail on that would be helpful.
For sure. Started off, it was actually intensity wise, I kept it quite like time under tension. So it was like a 4 second pull, sorry, 5 second pull, 4 second rest. And as time went on, I increased the time under tension to match the time that it was holding on to this particular crimp. So it was like usually between 10 and 12 seconds.
Because that was the time on the wall, right? That we counted for your on that project, right? It was 10, 12 seconds.
Yeah,
Okay, when you say so a rep and you're talking about the amount of seconds, so it's not that you're curling it up, reaching an intensity level and releasing it and then trying to find that intensity level again. Are you curling it, hitting that intensity level that you're looking at on the Tindeck and then holding it for that prescribed time related
for
to the
that
project?
prescribed time. Yeah, yeah. Basically curl it up, hit the level of say 75% from a max. 4 second goes off, you rest, straight back on. And as I say, over time, I built it up so that it was like 12 seconds hold, which is incredibly intensive on the hands and forearms. And again, the rest was quite small, which I really enjoyed because again, it's just replicating the climb itself because yeah, you're moving between the holes quite quickly.
How did you test your 100% max? Maybe that sounds obvious, but was it like how much you can pull as a peak force during the curl, or how much you can hold for 3 seconds while curling? Just what did that testing look like?
Testing, totally fresh, rest day beforehand, and again, just curling in and just closing my hand as tightly as I could with no other like training interventions, as I say, like I would say a day or 2 days before, total rest, and just again keep it the same, curl it in, take that measurement, and work out a percentage of that. So it's quite straightforward.
And you said that you were doing this exercise 2 or 3 times a week. Was that on rest days or during your warm up?
During my warm up for climbing, yeah, that was really nice because it didn't take a lot of time, so I could work it around. Yeah, if I was doing a little bit of lifting or something else as part of my warm up, like deadlifting or yeah, some benching, whatever it may have been, I would just tie it around that. So it was very time efficient from a work perspective as well.
How did you feel on the wall after doing basically working sets as your warm up?
Super strong.
It's so strange to me how hesitant people are to do that. Like I talk to so many people and you will definitely feel it a little tired at first because you're just not used to that stimulus. But it really doesn't make a lot of sense to get on a wall and actually try hard unless you're really activating a lot of muscles in the shoulders and the chest and the back and certainly the fingers. And like I've talked about this in lots of different podcasts for lots of years, and Yeah, it's another good example of how we can really, and certainly Rob's again kind of an exception. He doesn't need a lot of moderate intensity climbing practice. He needs only very high intensity climbing practice for this particular project. And so other people, you might not need that much of a stimulus before projecting, but there's that.
Yeah, I was reticent to do training before climbing, and to some extent I still am. I usually do one max set. Just one. So I'll do, lately it's been a one arm hang on a 20 mil edge, like, so just my max effort on that before, after I've warmed up, and then climbing. And I actually, yeah, I haven't found any kind of hindrance on my climbing, although I'm only doing one set. But the reason I asked Rob was because when I do those warm-ups, I get so pumped when I'm doing the lemon squeezing activity, and so I worried that maybe I was gonna fatigue myself.
But I would say you do, yeah, I totally agree with Tyler. You do adapt quite, I'd say the first few sessions, definitely there was an element of fatigue there, but you do adapt pretty quickly. Another thing I would add a fair amount of like sprint training into my warm up as well. Because again, it's more from a neurological recruitment perspective. So I do my like lemon squeezing in a way, like the finger curls, do my sprints, come back, obviously increase the intensity, do the curls, and then obviously climb after.
And in terms of the energy systems from like a phosphagen or a glycolytic energy system perspective, those things clear really fast. And so there's really no concern to think that doing a short strength training session before you climb is going to fatigue you to the point where you don't have the ability to climb hard. Conversely, if you're not getting motor units activated in your warm up, your coordination is not going to be as high as it could be either. And then there's good science in other sports and soccer in particular where they show that like strength training warm up routines are better for productive adaptation in the sport and reducing injury risk.
Yeah, I kind of have this memory of reading a study where I want to say a sprinter, Ben Johnson, would do max squats right before competing. I shouldn't say tons of max squats. He would do a one rep max to really potentiate his nervous system and be warmed up. And it begs the question, Rob saw great results with this. Who is that for? Who is it not for? And how would you mix in kind of the more traditional yielding isometrics into training?
I just did like at the bouldering project here in Salt Lake for the last 2 months. I've done like a free 1 hour kind of tea and training chat, like on a weekend night, and we talk about just topics. And the first topic was like fingerboard training, and then the second one was about block lift training. And I would say those could be used interchangeably as long as the intention is the same. Like if you want to use a fingerboard and be more intentional with your training, that is okay. You will be able to do that. If you want to use a block lift, you would use the same intention. That would be okay. They're just different tools that essentially do the same thing as long as we use them with intention. I would say that's totally okay for anyone that wants to get stronger fingers. And it's pretty easy to do and easy to implement before climbing and a safe way to do it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but like I would say anyone could do that.
Yeah, I want to ask more questions on that. Where when you're saying hangboard training or block training, are we talking about curling up, or are we just talking about yielding isometrics?
So most people, I would say, don't need to run out and buy like a Tindeck, although I think it's an amazing tool to auto regulate your training. But if you're going to block lift something off the ground, you're going to do some form of yielding isometric. But before that, you should get as much muscle activity as you can by not literally curling the fingers, but flexing into the MCP joint. I envision as like, and I have lots of videos on my account of myself curling my body into the ground, into this curled position, squeeze the lemon thing, and then standing up with it, but no loss in grip. But if you actually watch people do block lifts, especially now that there's some block lift challenge, it is a crazy dangerous load, in my opinion. Because the first thing that happens is everyone's fingers just open up and then they just drag their fingers up. And from my perspective, that is a complete waste of training time. You're not getting anything out of that other than risking overloading the pulleys and the joints, because there's no doubt that those massive loads are risky. And so, with any sort of intervention, even if people want to do fingerboard training, I have them do the same thing. Be very intentional with the loads if the loads are a little lighter than you're used to, that's not a bad thing. And most people that actually follow through with that will be like, my fingers aren't as sore. I can tell that they're getting stronger on the climbing wall, but it's not about the numbers. And that's kind of the hard thing to separate from what people do on the training wall. We get obsessed with the numbers.
Okay, so I'm making a false dichotomy by saying, hey, there's just this classic training of yielding isometrics where it's as much weight as you can hang, and it's just all on your tendons, your fingers are opening up. And then there's the other end of the spectrum of just as muscular as you can make it, more intention to the voluntary contraction and overcoming isometric. And what I hear you're saying is that even if we're doing some of those traditional types of training like block pulls or hanging on the fingerboard, that you should bring intention to their voluntarily contract before even making it yielding isometric. And yes, your numbers might be a bit less, but you're getting more of a training effect and also less of a risk. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. Like the point is to make your muscles increase their recruitment a little bit. So I want to make sure every effort is muscular, and the goal is to not get hurt. And so I want to limit what I'm using in terms of load to make sure it stays within the confine of my muscle. And if I also do that, you can auto regulate your training a little better every session. Like I did the podcast, I think we talked about last time, that I did with Steven, and we did a whole training session, but after I could still one arm hang an edge, even though I was tired, but my actual force numbers when we measured them were down like 25%. And so if people get in the habit of trying to make their finger training more muscular, they will get better feedback on how tired they are every session, which is amazing. That's like gold for rock climbers that want to train their fingers.
Okay, that was really cool. That last minute, that was wonderful. Thanks for clearing that up. And I'm going to ask you, Rob, focusing more on the intention and the muscular contraction. How did your fingers feel? Did you have any tweakiness, or was there any risks that you felt like with that kind of training compared to maybe more of the traditional style?
I think if I may, I'm going to come back to Tyler's last point, just about, again, it's about intentionality. With these block lifting competitions, as you say, it's like you grab an edge and you just try and pull it off the floor, and this can do whatever it wants. If we think of space and how we actually move on a wall, and contextually, if we're moving at speed and you're catching a hold, like training on the fingerboard and being in this obviously open position where you're contracting, yes, there's going to be a little bit of a yielding response in the hand when you catch a hold. It's good to train. And the same goes for, okay, we're going to, specifically for my project, I'm going to close my hand in, my lumbricals are strong and activated, and it's giving me the stability that I need. So I think for everybody, you could definitely, if it's hanging on a fingerboard, whatever it may be, front three, it's the intentionality of it.
It's not lazy and saying that people are lazy, but it's kind of a lazy intention with training where when I have athletes, and I have again videos of this with the Tindac, like if you're gonna do a three finger drag, that's totally reasonable to train, but you still should be focusing on curling your fingers and not letting them just like totally drag open and then you're just hanging on your skeleton. We do that when we're fatigued and we're climbing and we're getting pumped, but like you don't want to do that with a double your body weight on a fingerboard. That's insanely dangerous.
I hear you, and this is actually something again that resonated with me, where it was just like, okay, Josh, if you're just hanging with no intention on your skeletal system, like how much gains you have left in your connective tissue to make after years and years of doing that on the wall when fatigued. But it does beg the question to me, like, is there a role that plays, or do we get that from climbing enough? Like, basically the how do we know if our connective tissue doesn't need specific training from just kind of that relaxed passive hanging?
I definitely feel you'll get enough of that from rock climbing in itself. There's no doubt about it. Again, it's just, yeah, just coming back to, the amount of force that's going to be going through your hand on a hold. Say if you're performing a dynamic move and catching a 10 millimeter flat edge with open three, I would bet if you're moving well, the force on that hold is going to be significantly less than 150% of your body weight. So obviously taking that to pin lifting off the floor with, double body weight, is it really worth it?
Yeah, we can. I would also maybe tie in that we don't have a lot of upper extremity tendon research just more broadly, but like the stuff we have for the lower extremity would say athletes that perform high volume, low intensity, very cyclic activities like runners have thicker Achilles tendons and connective tissues than non runners do. But those adaptations are strain induced. Those are injuries that heal and they have scar tissue and they have bigger, thicker cross sectional area tendons. And so when you look at a climber that's been climbing a long time and they have all their fingers are really bulky, those are adaptations from stress. Those are micro injuries that we recover from and we build stiffness and strength from them, right? Like people get so many of those just by doing their normal climbing activities. And the other research that's been done with like climbing pulley stress show that the middle two finger pulleys are pretty close to their rupture load on the climbing wall with like grabbing small crimps and hard crimps. And so we're already pushing the boundaries, I think, of what the fingers can tolerate with the climbing. I think doing so more off the wall is a mistake. And I don't think the actual outcomes or the there's a point of diminishing returns that going beyond it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And any healthcare provider that I talk to, like Rob or Paul or Volker or Stian, they all see that, they all totally agree. Everyone that works in the space in healthcare, like, yes, that's not a very reasonable, idea.
Yeah, that really resonates with me where it's like the focus is not just loading up more numbers and just getting by with whatever means possible because the risk reward is really poor there. And that if we're going to be training, who cares about the numbers? Let's talk about the actual muscular adaptations that we can get. So yeah, that's why this really piqued my interest, you guys. And I guess actually just to close that loop though, Tyler, what are the risks with more muscular focus contraction? Is there still risk there? I mean, I guess there's always risk in anything we do, but do you ever see people get injured doing these finger curls?
Yeah, I've seen some people have soreness from those, mostly because it's a new stimulus. It's slightly different. But then again, it's hard to know whether it's from that because I wasn't really with them seeing the actual method they were doing, because it's easy to, especially in a training testing context, if there's a group of people, it's easy to try and cheat the test to make the numbers look greater. And so it's easy to lean back or to add a little bit more force in other ways. So it's really hard to know in that context. But I would say by and large, over the last 4 years of my life talking with my clients that have implemented these things, it's probably only been positive in terms of my fingers aren't as sore. I feel strong on the wall. I've kind of been able to let go of this idea that I need to continually build, 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 and I can spend more time practicing using harder holds on the wall. And I've, like myself personally, I've seen huge gains with that. Rob has seen gains with that. Like there's lots of people.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to speak to how your fingers felt when focusing more on the spectrum of muscular contraction?
I'm gonna say to feel healthy, and again because it's progressive. Like I would even use it out project days. I don't go so far in my like fit per se, but I definitely use it as part of my warm up for climbing whatever boulders I'm climbing on outside, and I really feel yeah, it's just a nice protective mechanism per se, and it's also a good guide of if I've had say a super busy week of work, and you're testing your fingers before you go out for a day's bouldering. It's like, oh, my numbers are off a little bit, so it's again you can just kind of guide how you want to approach your session. It's like, okay, I'm not going to get in the pro today because maybe I'm just not ready for it, so I'm just going to go and try something else.
So when your numbers are down, is that a good indication of systemic fatigue, or is it just happen to be that your fingers are tired? Like why is that a good gauge of, how your session might go?
I would say for myself, it's just a good. Figuratively, it's just like systemic fatigue from weeks of work. Yeah, and potentially maybe just pushing it too hard in the gym. It can happen, you know. You come out of a busy day, you go into the gym, you're like, okay, I'm going to maybe push this session a little bit harder. Not from like a finger strength training, but from, yeah, you do your finger strength, then you climb, and yeah, it's a nice way to relax and have fun.
I think it's important to note too. It could be like a systemic thing too. If you went and you went on a big long run and you're like, say, not in shape for running, and you went and you ran 10 miles, and then the next day you went to climb and you measured your force and your force is down, even though you didn't use your finger flexors on the run, systemically your central nervous system has a limit to its perception of effort. And so, or to its central motor command. So the perception of effort will be higher. So your ability to produce a high central command, i.e. strength, will be down. And those things also influence like your ability to be coordinated. So if he's trying to climb something at his project level, paying attention to that absolutely is important. If he's going out and doing slab climbing, technical mobility skills stuff, probably not as much, but anything that requires a high level of power definitely would be, a bad strategy to try and approach that day.
Let's say the opposite happens and you're feeling great on your finger curls. What does that say about the condition your connective tissue is in that day? Is that a reasonable indicator that your tendons are healed up, your pulleys are at lower risk for injury?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question because there's also a distinction, and some of the research papers kind of discuss like this threshold beyond which finger strength gains are no longer beneficial for climbing. And part of the reason I would say there is like if we make the tissues too stiff, that kind of increases pulley injury risk because grabbing onto holds really fast allows you to transfer force more quickly, but they pull away from the attachment point. And so there's like a balance you want between how stiff your tissues get and then how much compliance they have with other types of training interventions. And so I would say having a day where you're feeling incredibly powerful and snappy, I would say that's a little bit more of an injury risk, but I think everyone would take that risk. They'd be like, let's go. We're going to try hard, but I wouldn't say that there's less injury risk in that context.
Yeah, just would be nice. I feel like sometimes I come in and I feel great. And in the back of my head, I'm always like, okay, I feel great, but do my pulleys, how do I know that I'm actually not under too much volume, and that that connective tissue that doesn't get a lot of blood flow? I don't have as much of a deep understanding of it. If you come in, sometimes when you know yourself, you're kind of like, okay, I feel okay today, but I'm kind of tired. There's like a low level, tiredness, but I don't know if I have a good feeling about how my, how my A2 pulley is. Like, I don't think I have a direct connection with that. And so any kind of indications that allow me to know, no, you're actually recovered today, which I'm not sure anyone's figured out, but boy, would that be helpful.
I think yeah, it's really tying into, if you want to say, like the technical, tactical, physical, and psychological model. And on any given day, from say testing your fingers and not, yeah, say you're pulling on the 10 deck and your numbers are looking really good. Of course, there's that psychological component. It's like, let's go, let's do this. And yes, there's potentially, as Tyler says, you're more at risk. But yeah, there's always going to be that little person sitting on your shoulder saying, go, 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 today could be the day, the conditions are good. you know?
That's all I hear always, Rob, is I always hear go, go, go. Like, you got this. Oh, you're tired. Maybe you just need to try harder, you wuss. And then I get hurt. So
I wrote down when you were saying that, like, I would say maybe a good argument for training regularity. And where Rob, you mentioned like, when did you do your strength training? I did it every day that I climbed. Say, cool, that box is checked off. Like, there's no need for Rob now to go after his session. Oh, I need a finger strength train. Or tomorrow I'll be like, oh, I need a finger strength train. Because no one really has a good handle on when's the best time to finger strength train in conjunction with climbing. And that's in every sport. There's just different camps of what people do and different schedules for periodization. But the argument for doing it every time you train is that's when you do it. And then you don't have to worry about it because there's so much anxiousness in the world of training that when do you do it? And just going to a normal gym and watching what people do, everyone wants to do some form of finger strength training, which is mostly justified. But when they do it is maybe not the best for them to get feedback on how their session goes. So if you can just incorporate a similar routine every time before you get on the wall, then that should give you good feedback on like whether you're ready to do whatever on that particular day.
Okay, no, that's all really helpful. So, Tyler, you heard what Rob was looking for. You looked at his background. You said, let's focus more on the muscularity component and getting into that position that mimics exactly the holds in your project. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of trainees who have been doing it for decades, they probably have spent plenty of time doing block pulls, fingerboarding, and kind of that, yielding isometric manner. When you look at Rob now, he's had all this success with this. Are you going to say, okay, Rob, next cycle, let's go back to one arm hangs? Or is this kind of a protocol that you think someone should lean into when they already have decades of experience doing the classic block pulls or hangboarding?
Yeah, he doesn't need to get better at hanging on edges. Like he's just really good at that. And his connective tissues are very tolerant of that and his skills are very good at that. So, but it would be like a periodization scheme. Like he doesn't need to do that much intentional training, for 12 months a year, like because it'll plateau and then it becomes maybe an injury risk. So you want to we want to increase his performance and we want to make his numbers go up a little bit. And then we want the training to look more like a particular project. And then we want to lean in and maybe do way less off the wall non-climbing training during the period where he can actually spend more time just trying these projects. And then we got to back off and then you could do more volume. So it would more be like doing more volume in a preseason or before the season of similar things, but do more repetitions where they're not as long a duration of hold. You could just do lifts off the ground with the intentional curl first and then do hypertrophy kinds of protocols and then taper that into performance. So then it becomes just normal periodization for an athlete.
So not everyone has Rob's decades of training or incredible ability climbing on V14 and up. How does someone know if focusing on the end of the spectrum of muscular focus versus connective tissue focus is right for them? What kind of person should still be including more block pulls, more yielding isometrics compared to Rob?
Again, I think I don't think it doesn't matter as much for most people as it would for Rob. And so and like I mentioned with the fingerboarding protocol that we did the presentation for, is like there was a lot of new climbers there. And so I was like, okay, you guys aren't spending that much time on small holds when you climb on gym problems because the holds are getting bigger and bigger. And so in your warm up, keep your feet on the ground and grab onto an edge and curl into it up to a percentage and just get your muscles in your finger flexors and your hand more engaged and do 5 to 7 sets of that mixed in with other things and then do your climbing session. And that's it. They don't need to do anything else. For people that are maybe in the intermediate stage where they're climbing on boards regularly and they have done some finger training, they need to be very intentional with the finger training with the muscle activity before either a block lift or a fingerboard. I would still have them mostly do that before they're climbing or maybe on a strength training day if they're using boards regularly. But they would benefit probably more from using the wall and getting better at coordinating holds on the wall than they would off the wall training anyways.
Makes
I don't know if
sense.
that answers your question, but
It does. It really does. Yeah.
it's the same. It doesn't make any sense that someone would do a finger strength training protocol and not make it more muscular. That makes no sense.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on. Ego. I like seeing bigger numbers on the 10 deck. So that's just, yeah, there's ego involved for sure. Of course.
I mean, there is, but even if you're going to pull with your upper body and do a yielding style test, you still want it limited by the finger force that your finger flexors are producing, not what your upper body is producing, because it's just like an inefficient use of your time.
I hear you. Rob, have you recommended this to other people that you're working with? Like, how does this change your view of training yourself and others?
I certainly have, but I even feel it's Tyler, like you see it a lot in the gym. The kids come in and they want to jump on the kilter board, and it's kind of like, say, if I'm there and you're super psyched and you've done your warm up and the kids are coming in a little bit later, they hop straight onto the kilter, and within a couple of minutes, they're kind of like, oh, I haven't really warmed up properly. It's like, well, yeah, if you implemented something like this beforehand, you're going to be way more recruited. It's going to be a lot safer. I'm going to say kids, and obviously, kids that are in their 20s and they're like psyched to pull hard on the board. So I really feel implementing something like this before their session is, yeah, definitely valuable.
Rob, can you tell us again about that wall crawling that you did? Because again, it kind of surprised me that you saw gains from that when I think of a guy like you who's so seasoned and probably spends a good amount of time outdoors. What were the gains you saw there? And just describe, I know you did already talking about like the crimps you had in the wall, but just tell me again what you felt from it and why it worked so well for you.
So for me, like I've always enjoyed moving fast. I would say it's like my super strength of just being quite highly coordinated at speed. And for me, for the wall crawl, like we're holding holds for quite a long period of time. So again, 10 to 12 seconds to lock down, hold, quite a lot of opposition. So there's a lot of drive coming through like the opposing foot adductors. So it's kind of systemic tension development. It's not just like, okay, I'm just going to lock in this hold and it's just this upper body component, like the whole system's being challenged isometrically and just moving between, yeah, each of the moves.
Was the time under tension, or was like, were you trying to mimic the climb as well as kind of these same
For
criteria
sure.
that you're using for the?
I think we did like some wide, we did some intentional wide position, like very
hmm
like wide, spider type positions as well for those drills.
I would say for me, even like starting out on that drill, I started out on like a 20-degree overhang because again, it's just like understanding where you want your body to be in space to perform it, and then taking it to actually like something significantly steeper. So like at home here, I have a 40-degree, so it's just basic. Obviously, it's working the musculature of the back slightly differently, but I can really get into those positions and yeah, lock it down.
Rob, I think I have a similar style to you where I like to be dynamic. I like to move quick and kind of whip between holds. I struggle on that very slow, isolating style that I think of when I think of outdoors, and that's that technical, really locked off. And what I find is that when I climb outdoors a lot, when I come into the gym, I actually am much stronger in the gym. I have that control. And the reason why I'm sharing that and bringing that up is, was that something that you found as well? And I want to hear that to see if other people listening might be recognize, oh wait, I guess I'm like that too. I'm the kind of, yeah, I whip around, and then when I climb outdoors, and it enforces that very controlled manner, and then I do better in the gym after climbing outdoors, which is not the same thing everyone experiences.
So, oh, that's so context dependent. Now you're getting me into like I'm thinking of so Fontainebleau in France for sure. I would come back and I would totally agree with you that that kind of like real slow locking things down and being in control is heightened for sure. Whereas what I would find from climbing at Fairhead, I can really like let the speed element, like, yeah, you can just let that go and just roll with it. So I kind of feel actually spending a bit more time working on it in the gym has actually been beneficial.
Cool. Yeah, I just ask these questions because it just helps when people are listening. They go, am I like Rob? Like, do I need to focus on X, Y, or Z? Because sometimes we're not always aware of what our style is or what our strengths or weaknesses are. But sometimes you get these hints like, okay, when I go to Fontainebleau and then I come back, I just feel different and controlled and stronger and feel good. And so, there's always a hint there, like maybe I tend towards that kind of dynamic style, which, yeah, that's me, Rob. So I'm listening closely.
A couple of things that I was thinking of would be, it's really like at your limit when you're projecting, like what Rob would do on his project. It's just not that much practice time on your hands. It's like very particular to the rest of the body, and there's nothing that will replicate the problem more than the problem itself. But in terms of a training stimulus, it's just most people aren't spending enough time on those holds to gain a lot of control and capacity on them. And then we try and replicate that, and we try and reproduce that on a fingerboard, which is not the same skill. It's not the same force. It's not the same body position. It's just not the same. And so most of the time when I love going to the gym now and just like watching people. It's really interesting just to see, and not that to like criticize people, just to like see what people's habits are. And it's really common to go to the gym that I climb at where there's a lot of new climbers or people that are like wanting to get better, and they will try and climb on a board. Let's say the tension board is very classic to see it on because most people stay the hell away from the 2016 moon board that are new, but people that are like they'll climb on the kilter board, but then the tension board, the holds get small. And so what they'll do is they'll try some problems, but they will not be able to coordinate the small holds. And they will struggle on the board, and then they'll just stop climbing and they'll go to a fingerboard and start doing some sort of fingerboard protocol that who knows which protocol. It's not a bad or good protocol. Those athletes, if that's someone that's listening, they would be so much better off like just turning the lights off on the board and just spend time on the climbing wall, just climbing around on whatever is hard for them holds with bigger feet and just gain that coordination on a climbing wall. Like for people that are like having trouble feeling like they're not making gains in their finger strength that actually transfer, that's all they need to do. And they'll be blown away at how much better they'll feel.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm kind of one of those people, Tyler, but I have a big history of climbing. I am strong on a lot of these holds. I wouldn't say I'm one of those people who then ran over to the fingerboard. I just, you know, would get angry and switch to a different problem. And that idea of really taking the time to say, okay, this is a hold that you struggle on. So let's isolate that movement and get familiarity with time on it, body positions on it is a little bit of a different approach than just hoping for the best and switching to a new problem.
Because if you were measuring how much force you would put on the hold, if you could measure that, and then you measured your forces off the wall, I guarantee you're strong enough to grab that hold. You're definitely producing more force than you actually use on the hold. That's a body positioning, hip flexibility, coordination, adaptation more than it is a force problem.
Good stuff. Did you want to add anything there, Rob?
Yeah, I was just thinking along the lines of, I mean, obviously climbing is many different things to all of us. And just reflecting on what you'd said there, Josh, about, understanding yourself more in the positions that you are on the wall and whatnot. And like realistically, we're striving for mastery and we'll never achieve it, you know, just because there's so many threads to pull on and there's not enough lifetimes to like fully understand it. But I feel like just having a little bit more intention, not just with the fingers, but actually on the wall. And just, yeah, I totally agree with Tyler, like spending that time, pull the knees in, but whatever it may be, it's definitely going to have a more like positive impact on your overall climbing experience than just, yeah, you go in, pull on the tension board and walk away after 5 minutes. You're like, okay, I'm going to the fingerboard. Yeah.
Well, one of the big things that I got from talking to you guys was in this quote that we actually said before. It was, you can't get strong if you can't stay healthy. And a lot of these things we're talking about is be careful just loading it all up to hang on your skeleton. Be careful just hucking yourself at little holds and hoping for the best. It's like practice muscular control in a controlled environment, striving for ability, not just an absolute number. And then also practicing on the wall in a safe manner that allows you to develop that skill so that you can go to your project safely. And so, this whole like risk reward ratio is something that really stood out to me when we talked more and more about being on the spectrum towards muscular contraction, because it feels safer, you guys. Like it just, I mean, again, to go back to that thing you said to me a while ago, Tyler, was how much more do you think your connective tissue is going to adapt? Like you've been doing this for 30 years, your finger is going to get 20% thicker, Josh? You think you're going to get like giant pulleys? No. So be careful. And I think just that's one of the big things that I take away from this kind of training that you've been doing, Rob and Tyler recommend is it seems safer, seems a better on the risk reward spectrum for an experienced climber.
For sure. And again, it's to understanding that fact that it's, as you do get older, like if you do get injured, it's just as simple as this, you're going to be out for longer, you know. Um, and I'm just going to rewind even right back to from the training specifics of the actual days. Like I'm very mindful of if it is a rest day, it is a rest day. And it's been quite nice then to have that like finger strength training, climbing training, for me, a day off. So if I'm doing those sessions 3 days a week, I'm definitely taking plenty of time to recover as well.
Okay, as we start to wrap up, Tyler, we talked about the kind of protocol that you gave Rob. There is these finger curls, really focusing on intention, as well as the wall crawl for practicing being on small holds. Is there anything we didn't cover that you really want to make sure we get out there for people listening who aren't Rob, but may be like, hey, this could really help me?
No, I think the maybe the way that I've talked about in the past too is there's a lot of drills for footwork in the climbing world. There's lots of, use your front step, use your back step, use your toe, etc., use your heel hook. But there's not those for fingers, and there's not those as much for hands on a climbing wall. It's just, hey, get really good at using your feet, and hey, load as much as you can on a 10-second hang. You're like, that's the advice. That's kind of not very complete advice when it comes to athletes getting more equipped and prepared to grab smaller and harder holds. And it's really, if people are wanting to climb harder problems and they feel like they can't grab the holds and they can't own the holds, it's probably not a forced problem. It's really just they're not doing it often enough to gain the adaptation. So people can really get in the habit of getting the muscles more, let's say, wakened up or activated prior to their climbing sessions, and then do a couple of those wall crawls before their climbing session. And that's probably enough for most people. And they'll notice on average that they'll be able to position their body better under those holds. It is more of a footwork mobility exercise on the lower extremity than it is only focused on the hands. So even though we're talking all about the hands, I think about it more as it teaches me personally to hang on my fingers on the holds and put more load through my feet instead of pulling on the holds. And so I treat it more like a fingerboarding protocol on the wall, which actually is a distribution of pressure through the toes. So it is a footwork drill too. So
I liked how you talked about coordination and footwork idea where if you think about footwork and people standing on feet, like our legs are always plenty strong enough for climbing, unless we're talking about some giant dino, but but standing on a little foot in the right way at this right angle is more skill than it is strength, because let's face it, if you go from a 300-pound squat to a 1,000-pound squat, your footwork doesn't get any better. You just that's not what we're looking for. So I thought that was a cool analogy. And now I'll toss it to you, Rob, to make sure that I kind of did a good job of outlining what your protocol was, the gains you had, and if there's anything else you want to throw in about it.
I think don't feel there's anything else to add. I mean, the protocol's simplistic enough. It's just being intentional about what you're doing. You don't need to go max about it. The wall crawls as well, you can use those. As I say, it depends what you want to build as far as your time under tension, your systemic tension from your toes to your hands. You can obviously spend more time on each move if needs. If you need to develop a little bit more strength in those positions. I think, yeah, we've pretty much covered everything.
Can I just ask you how it felt to see a big gain in your finger strength when you were in your late 40s?
Oh, it's always easy to get carried away with the numbers, isn't it? Yeah, it's great actually. I'm not going to complain. As long as it helps me on the real thing, then that's where it comes down, doesn't it?
Of course, just any comments on, I think you said you had that classic line, like age is just a number. It's inspiring, Rob, to see you climb so well, and gives me hope that I can take your protocol, weave into my life, and then climb just like you.
I look forward to seeing what that brings, Josh. I want to hear about it.
Okay, I'll book a ticket and see if me mimicking your training will let me get on your project and do well.
Yeah, you got to come to Fairhead, man. You both got to come to Fairhead.
Yeah, kind of Ireland's kind of having a little bit of a moment in the climbing media. You know, you had Keenan and Aiden and Katie get out there. Of course, always David Fitzgerald, all them friends of the pod, and yeah, quite a spot you got there. Maybe not known for low humidity, but you make up for it with beautiful green scenery that is just what a beautiful place.
Yeah, it really is. Very, very, yeah, very grateful to have spent so long just enjoying the place. Great.
Okay, well, I'm going to close out by asking you, Tyler. I don't think I asked you this last time. I don't think I was always doing it, but Tyler, how do you go from good to great?
I think you go from good to great, not being, I guess, stubborn with your training approaches. You know, people tend to be very back into a corner and, you know, make relationships between their training and their outcomes as being more causal probably than is necessary. And people are very, you know, very stubborn about that for some reason with finger strength training in particular. I think being able to let that go and know that we can't always be right, myself included. You know, I'm as quick to admit, like, these are ideas that come from good science in other sports and contexts with some mentorship programs that I've done with some researchers, and like they seem to apply very well, but I'm not, you know, opposed to saying that like we don't fully understand these things. So I would say just, you know, being open-minded is definitely probably the best way to go from good to great.
Yeah, Tyler, that one resonates with me with all of our chats because I'm stubborn in the sense that I just I don't want to do something new. Like I want to go climbing. I got here from just showing up, doing my thing. I've definitely plateaued. And you just want to say like I don't have anything more to learn. I just need to show up and keep trying hard, but I want to keep an open mind, and I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing perspectives. And you know, I don't know, I need to be less stubborn as well. So, Rob, how about you? What do you think it takes to go from good to great?
I want to say, damn it, Tyler, you've just
I stole
stolen
it.
what I was gonna. I was just gonna say, you just stole what I was gonna say. I swear, man. Like, yeah, I'm gonna say it's obviously a little bit of maturity and age here, but it's being open to learning new things, experiment, especially in experimenting with things, and yeah, a few things to add to that. I've been thinking about this the last few days. One, enjoy the process. Two, keep a journal. And three, wear gratitude like a cloak, and it'll feed every corner of your life.
Hmm.
That's a good one. I gotta ask more about number two. What do you mean keep a journal? What's your journal look like?
Super simple. I've kept journals from, I'm going to say, like the year 2000. Uh, all first ascents, good times with friends, training. And I write it, I prefer to write it down than actually, myself and Tyler have talked about this as well. I like the connection. And it's, yes, I've got lots of books, but when you flick through it, it's definitely more tangible than saving it on your phone. So that's just my thoughts.
Any big links you've ever made by looking back on your journal and saying, "Oh, I was climbing well at this date. I wonder why."
Ooh, I think it always changes. Always changes. Maybe having like 50% humidity once every 5 years in Ireland is what's made the difference.
100%.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Conditions always. It wasn't me. It was the conditions.
Yeah.
Uh, so this was a podcast. We will put it on YouTube. But Tyler, can you tell people about where to find some of your YouTube videos, as well as just shout out your company again, your website, and how people can follow you?
Yeah, we have, I think, four kind of bigger, well produced YouTube videos that cover a lot of these concepts that we're talking about. Those are maybe a year old, and my perspectives maybe evolved a little bit on it, but most of that information is there. And then I put most of my stuff on Instagram. I do a lot of research, citation things, and discussion there. That's probably the biggest platform. I've used Patreon in the past, but just like spread myself too thin, where it just like became too much work. So probably the Instagram's the easiest way to get a hold of me. And then all the links to courses that I'm teaching. I'm going to France in June and have some courses online of finger training methods that I'm teaching in March. So those things can be found on my profile on Instagram and my website.
Yeah, I want to highlight that I've seen those videos. Tyler, you've been communicating this kind of training for years. So I don't want it to seem like, this is brand new and it's, magic and it's a panacea and like you just unlock something. You've been communicating this for a long time. This kind of methodology is not, new for today. But I think for me, it's something that even though it's maybe talked about, it hasn't become completely mainstream. It's not something that I see a lot of people fully adopting. And so I appreciate you also taking the time to dive into a little bit more of the nitty gritty on it. So that was really helpful for me. And also hearing Rob's experience. And Rob, again, knowing how accomplished of a climber you are, knowing your background and your degree and coaching of people and all this. And then, so hearing your take was really helpful for me. And on that note, Rob, can you share again about your company, where people can find you if they want to work with you and follow you too?
Sure. Again, similar to Tyler, Instagram's probably the best place to find us. My wife is a physio, works in the musculoskeletal side of things. For myself, for coach education, climbing performance, you can certainly find us on My Therapy Physio on Instagram, and the links are on there for everything.
Yeah, go visit Robin Fairhead. And I watched a bunch of the videos of some of your first descents, and you have a penchant for high balls. Beautiful. I shouldn't say it's not just that they're high balls, it's that they're beautiful striking lines. So thanks for being part of that community, developing so much. Everyone I talked to in that community really had wonderful things to say about you. And thanks also for hopping on call here in the morning here in the US and taking the time to share your experience with everyone. It really inspiring for me. And I do hope to come and visit your project. Actually, I hope you do it and then you share the beta with me and I can join you on the second ascent.
That'd be great to see you there. Hey.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Thanks for thinking of me when these results happen. Thanks for sharing the journey and just good times, you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Josh.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.